Well, I titled today The Humane Race. And I notice in that even that I wrote Hebrews 11, 1 through 3, which is not true. It's Hebrews 12, 1 through 3. So if there's anything that's true about humanity, it's we have flaws, we have frailties. Even when we try to get things right, we still get things wrong. So maybe that's even a good mistake to have made. But again, it's Hebrews 12, 1 through 3. But I want to explain these three symbols real quickly. And first of all, I'll let you know that I didn't misspell the human race. It's the humane race, and that's why I titled it that way. What does humane mean? Well, when I think about it, sometimes people say, well, what is it that makes us different than and better than animals? Well, I've known a lot of animals in my life, and frankly, I think animals could build a case that in many cases they do better than we do. But humane, humanity, what is our best characteristic there is maybe that we have the capacity for compassion, humane. If something's humane, it means it's got mercy, it's got empathy, it's got a gentleness, a capacity to put yourself in the other person's place and maybe even help, maybe even, not just survival of the fittest and all that kind of stuff. And then you look at what inhumane things are. Well, we think about that again. I could make a long list, and you could as well. But these three symbols, what it basically means is equal is greater than division. Our equality is greater than division. And when I think about that, I wrote it down this way. Our equality is greater than our divisions. Now, you might say, I don't agree with that. Well, that's okay if you don't, I suppose, but I'm hoping that even if you say, well, at least on an ideal level, I would agree that we would do better to seek the side of commonality than we would to figure out all the things that make us different and divide us. See, and I think about that even with every relationship I have. If my wife and I want to start making a list of all the things that are different and could divide us, well, then I'm sure we could come up with a long list and probably get in a big fight. But if we will start thinking about the commonality, the things we agree on, the things that we work toward, the goals we share, the memories we have, the common humanity, well, then our equality is greater than our divisions. And it was John F. Kennedy who said this: what unites us is far greater than what divides us. And that is true in a factual sense. But sometimes in a practical sense, people get divided over the dumbest stuff. And so when I think about this, I want to talk to you today about the humane race, about running a race that the Bible talks about that is really common to all humanity. It doesn't matter when you were born, where you were born, how it is that you have some of the different things that go on in our life. Well, there's a commonality to all of humanity. And if you think on it with me, these verses, I just want to read these three verses through and then we'll come back to them. But it says, therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your soul. Now, again, I don't know about you, but I think there are a lot of things that could make me weary and discouraged in my soul. And sometimes I talk freely about those things, but I want to talk more about the things that give me strength and encouragement in my soul, which are found here in this. Because, again, when I think about it, this is what it's talking about here is these verses. I call them universal verses in the sense that for all time, in all places. These were written thousands of years ago to Hebrew people mainly, but they were persecuted people. They were people who were going through incredible difficulties, much of it racial, much of it cultural, much of it based on differences and people in power and people who weren't in power and all the rest of that. The struggle has been going on. And so when I think about that, this was written to the human race, about the race that all humans will run. And I wrote it down this way. Think about it. Lanes and laps and hurdle heights differ in this race. Some will walk, some sprint, some roll. Some will start well and finish poorly. Some will start poorly and yet finish well. And all crawl at times. But can I tell you something about it? Again, I'm not in any way wanting to minimize one person's struggle or maximize somebody else's struggle. For just a moment, what I want to do is remind us the commonality of humanity, the reality of the fact that whether somebody has a relatively difficult time or a relatively easier time, it is not easy being human and making it through this time on earth and doing it well. And yet this group of people, it says in this set of verses, it says that there were a great cloud of witnesses. I call this the crowd in the cloud. And what they are is they are people who are former finishers, people who already lived their life, already ran their race, so to speak. That's the metaphor being used. And it's kind of like if you've ever run a race and you realize there's people who got there before you did. So you're coming to the finish line, but you realize that there are people who finished first. There are people who've already gone ahead. And I think about that in humanity. I have my time on this planet. And if there's one thing that is true of all people, it's short and it isn't always sweet. It can be short and sour. It can be long and sour or seem long. But the truth is, this is common to every person on this planet is they were born. They're going to live for a relatively short time. They're going to die. And then the Bible says they'll face the throne of God. They'll face the judgment. They will be evaluated, not for how someone else ran or somebody else did this or this wasn't that. There won't be any of that. It'll be God looking at my life through the lens of complete knowledge of the advantages I had, the disadvantages I had, and what I did with the race that I ran. And see, I think about that. That is something that I think about all the time because the Bible says to the one who's been given much, much will be expected. To the one who's been given less, well, less will be expected. And God is able to work those things out. But what I look at is I look at my life and I know I have been given much. I've been given access to education that others didn't get access to. I've been able to get access to advantages, whatever they might be. I've had great friends. I had great family. All of these things are true. And I look at those things, but rather than looking at those as like some kind of, oh, look at me, instead, I think, well, look at me. And God, if I've been given much, much will be expected. I need to do something with my life. And what I need to do with that race that I run is be humane. Be humane, like, right? To look around. And if I do look around, don't look around thinking, well, I'm so much faster than that person, or I'm so better than that person, or why is that person struggling with that hurdle, or I lapped that person and all this. Listen, I've had more health than many got. I've had more life than many enjoyed. And so through all those things, God is going to look at my life and say, Scott, either well done, well run, or what were you doing? Because he's not going to ask, what were all the other people doing? He's not asking that of me. He's asking of me to run the race that's set before me. See, and I think about that again. There's a race set before me. There's a race set before you. And when people are talking about this and they're talking about that and they're dividing on this and dividing on that, I say, can we think for just a moment that everyone's running a race and it's not easy. It's not easy. And when I think about that, we will all stand before God. And I would rather stand before God for the fact that I stood for equality, commonality, for compassion, for humanity, than that I was on the side of division, that I was on the side of dividing, that I was on the side of dividing and conquering, or looking for ways that I could slice humanity all into little slices and say, I like this one, I don't like that one, I don't agree with this person, I don't agree with that person. That's not what I'm going to do. That's not what I want to stand before God for. And I found a little graph, and I thought it was kind of funny. The genetic similarity between a human and a human is 99.9%. When you think about this, maybe in the past we could have thought that we were all very, very, very different. But the more science we know, the more we learn about the reality of what's underneath and inside of us all. We are far more similar, far more equal than we are different. And I went on to find this little graph that I also thought was very good, which is the genetic similarity between a human and a banana is 60%. Now, when I say that, again, you might say, well, I want to argue with the science on this. You know, Scott, I don't know if it's really this. But maybe this argument is not appealing to you, right? And you say, like, you're on a slippery slope there. But I do like to live in some ways with this reality in front of me, which is that, you know what? When I look at the similarity I have with a person, the overlap I have with a person, for me to be inhumane to another human, it just doesn't make any sense at all. For me to be divisive over that 0.1% doesn't make any sense at all. See, and what the Bible teaches in this chapter is that God is the author and finisher of each human story. Every person on the planet, God says, this is where it's going to start. This is where it's going to stop. This is the character development. This is how they're going to do these things. You think about what an author is when somebody's saying something about an author. And I look at these things and I go, like, God is the start and the stop of things. And you know what? The people he put on the planet, I'm just one tiny little bit player in the whole thing, right? But I like the way that thought comes out. You know, again, when you think about it, equality. If we were a 1,000-page book, right? A 1,000-page book, our genetic differences would fit on one page. The things that we put so much emphasis on, how tall someone is, how wide someone is, what color their eyes are, whether their hair is curly or non-curly, or stayed in or didn't stay in, and all of these types of things, and, you know, the color of skin, that all of these things are characteristics of characters that God put on the planet. But I look at it and go, like, there's so much more that we have equal than that we have that divides. And yet we find a way sometimes to divide. And again, I am not in any way minimizing what it is to live as a person who has felt different or been treated differently or been treated unfairly because of a characteristic that God even put into that person. See, I think about it, that's exactly the point I'm trying to make, is that I look and I say, can we for just a moment remember that we all share at least one race, which is the life race that we're in. And guess what? We're not competing against each other. We're competing against time in some ways and growth. I'm competing against myself to see if I'm going to actually grow in this life, if I'm going to actually learn the things I'm supposed to learn in this life, if I'm going to, if God is the author and finisher of my story, that as you look at the character develop, you say, well, Scott was kind of an idiot early, but he learned a few things and he learned to care more about people, and he learned compassion and mercy and grace and forgiveness and growth and empathy through his life's experiences, good, bad, and ugly. And you know what? His life was better than some and worse than others. But the truth is, he will stand before God for his story in history. And see, I think about that again. That's a big thing for me to think about. And for me to, in any way, start to treat another human as if they were less than I. Well, wait a minute. Who's the author and finisher of my faith? Who's the author and finisher of my life? We are all characters from the same author. God is the author of humanity. I've got to think about that pretty closely, pretty seriously. And so this group of people, again, remind us what unites us is far greater than what divides us. And if we are on the side of division, we don't understand the vision that God had for humanity. Oh, equality. We're not all clones. We're not all exactly alike. The variety is part of God's plan. But a part of it was for us to have an equal desire to look at our life and say, hey, if I have power, I'm going to use it for the powerless. If I have an advantage, I'm going to use it for the disadvantaged. If I am a person who gets an easier time than some others, I'll use some of those extra cycles I have for somebody who is having a harder challenge than I am. Because you know what? We have more in common than we have in difference. I'm not going to be seeing myself as it's me against everyone else. See, think about this. Think about these verses. I highlighted them here on the screen because I think they're so important. In this just one verse, but in the set of verses, the commonality, the community, the we-ness, the us is everywhere in it. It says, therefore, it went through a list of people, very, very different people, may I remind you. The cloud crowd, they're the people who had finished former to us, the people who'd gone on, and the author listed a bunch of people from the Old Testament story. Men, women, rich, poor, known, lesser known, people whose story was tragic, people whose story was magic, people who had ups and downs, and people who were kings and prostitutes. I mean, crazy differences. And at the same time, there was a commonality to their life, which is they said, if I have to choose between being inhumane and being humane, and I need God's mercy, I need God's compassion, I need God's forgiveness, so I will be about those things in the lives of others. See, I think about it again. This was part of the point, is that the author of this book of Hebrews picked some intentionally tension-filled stories where it's like, well, wait a minute, that's not a Hebrew that we're talking about. Exactly. Wait a minute, you're using, like, putting women right next to important men, and you're like, You're bringing up stories that also have some, a little bit of scandal to them, that person wasn't perfect. Let's not think about that too much. And you go, exactly. It's talking about that the good people were still, and God's people still had some pretty messy stories. And I love that because it says we're surrounded by these people who are saying, hey, I ran my race. I ran my race in a humane way. I ran the humane race, not the inhumane race. And when I made mistakes, I owned up to them. And when I thought one way and needed to think a new way, I grew through the experiences that God brought into my life. And this is what it says. Since we're surrounded by them, let us do something. Let us lay aside weight. Let us lay aside sin that ensnares us. Notice the personal response and responsibility here. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Again, it's impossible, I think, to miss the usness of this. Notice there's no them. I think about this a lot of times. There's no them. There's only us. There's a lot of people out there who want to divide every category into them. Well, them, they are the problem, and they are the problem, and we are the solution, that sort of thing. And you go, wait a minute. There isn't the them. There's only us. We're all in this together. And whether somebody gets that or not, well, that's the difference between being humane and inhumane. But the truth is, I have 99.9% in common with the frailty of all people who have ever walked this planet. I get my little moment here. I'm not anything, however little bit of power I have evaporates like that. Again, I can be gone tomorrow and be part of the crowd in the cloud. But there's no them. There's no them. And anyone who's thinking that way is on the division side. See, in this group of people, if they had a hashtag, if they had a shirt maybe with a symbol, it might be the one I'm looking at here, but it could be ICBD. It can be done. That's basically what they're chanting here. This crowd is chanting to anyone still in the race right now, hey, it can be done. And I'm being mistreated. I'm being misunderstood. I'm being, all kinds of things. I'm being treated inhumanely. And they said, it can be done. It can be done. You can live humanely in the human race. You can be one of the humane racers, right? Even if you are sometimes treated completely wrong, you don't need to be one of the people treating people completely wrong, right? This will always be the case. There's always going to be people on both sides of this equation, right? There's always going to be people who, look and try to figure out the differences and the distinctions and why I'm better than that person, or why that person's worse than I am, or why I didn't get a fair start, or any of that kind of stuff. And you go, look, all of that can be true in this race. Again, I have more health than some people who were born with less health, but there have been healthier people than I am. I have more wealth than many and most, but there are people who are more wealthy than I. I can always look up and be jealous of somebody. I can always look down and be superior to somebody. But at some point, this is what the scriptures are teaching us to do, is we love to look at everyone else's lane except our own and compare them. But God says, run your race. There's a race set before you. How will you take the uniqueness of who you are and who you're not and run a great race so that someday your name could be put in the Hall of Faith, that whether you were somebody like, King David and that was your story, or you were Rahab the harlot and that was your story, it's still a part of history that these people lived differently. And you know what? Frankly, I think King David had a lot more to answer for and stand before God for. It needed mercy a lot more even than Rahab the harlot. And can I tell you that Jesus said the same? See, he had lots to say about sin, but you know who he tended to talk to? The people in power, the people with privilege, the people who were up in the ivory tower, not the people who were down in the pig pen. He didn't really do a lot of talking to them. He did some talking about them and said, there's place in heaven for you. There's a different life for you. I want to take you out of that mud, and I want to take you toward a life that really has the impact that it could, But I think about this, we love to look at someone else's lane and compare them, but that's not really going to be what God's going to do in our life. There's lots of different faces in the chapter 11 of Hebrews. There's lots of different paces that people ran at. There's lots of different places that people ran at. And there's lots of different graces that God gave in each of those things. And I think it's so important for us to look at this. And if we're ever going to really see change, it has to start with each heart. It has to start with each person. It has to start with me saying, you know what? I know perfectly well that I had an inside lane in life. And I can do a couple things with that. I can try to mess my life up, or I can start thinking, well, I didn't mess up my life like that. But you know what? If I had an inside lane, I wasn't as fast as I thought I was, right? If I got a head start of 15 laps on other people, then I can't feel that great about anything except to say, you know what? If I have a head start, then I need to have my head and my heart start understanding that no matter what, I will stand before the throne of God at the end of my life for what I had, what I didn't have, what I did, what I didn't do. And whether or not I ran a humane race or an inhumane race, whether I looked around and said, let me see how I can use, again, whatever gifts God has given me, life, liberty, all of those things, to bring those things to others. See, that's what you really think about. I love the fact that this verse talks about, let us cast aside the weight and the sin. What I love about that thought is, you can picture a runner, but with a parka on and like 4 pairs of pants and, hiking boots and a couple of bags, and, pulling a trailer, and say, like, is that illegal to do that? And you go, well, it might not be against the rules of the race, but it's not going to lead to a lead, right? It's not going to help that person really run well. And I think about that, there are things we can do, and you say, well, it's not illegal. You go, okay. It's not even immoral. Okay. But it's not wise. It's not the best use of the time that I have. It's not the best use of the place I have in eternity in the planet. It's a great thought that if I have excess weight and I'm debating on sin, I'm missing the point. They're not the same thing, but they can have the same effect. And you know what? Hate is a weight. I was thinking about this. Hate is a weight. And some people have even a justified reason why they might be bitter and angry and all of those things. And I get it. I do get it. And I'm getting it more and more of how somebody who's been tripped and pushed and shoved down and knocked down and all the rest can be very, very angry. But what's funny is sometimes people in incredible, sitting in the skybox are full of hate. And you go like, well, I don't understand that, but I can tell you it's a weight for either person. And to run well, I can't run full of bitterness. I can't run well and wisely through a bunch of division and divisive thoughts of, this person is not like me and I don't like them because they're not like me. And this person is angry at me and I'm not going to listen to them because I have my opinions and all that kind of stuff. And I say, man, that's not the way to bring out my best. See, I think about this. Again, these verses talk about sin and weight that needs to be cast aside. And there's things I've got to cast aside. Did you know there's mentalities that are changing for me? One of the great ways they're changing is I'm listening a lot more. I'm listening to my kids a lot more. I'm listening to my wife a lot more. I'm listening to my life a lot more. I'm listening to people I don't agree with a lot more, just simply so I can say, you know what? That's a part of the human story. That's part of the compassion. That's part of the empathy. That's part of not just seeing things through my eyes. Because it's easy to get ensnared. That's what it's saying here. It's easy to get enslaved. It's easy to get tripped up, to get slowed down, to get wiped out by stuff. And if nothing else, when we start, throwing a pity party for ourselves, and I've done that, Scott Clonch, pity party of one, inviting myself to my feel sorry for me thing. I can do that. I got no reason to do that, but I can do it. I can find reasons. I can at least find excuses. And this is what I find is that it's easy to get ensnared into thoughts that are not helpful in my race, in running my race with compassion, with passion, with forgiveness, with empathy, with mercy, with wisdom, it can be really easy to get ensnared. And enduring is hard. And if my easy life has made it hard, can I have a little bit more ability, even if I don't really understand? Can I have a little more humility to put myself in a person who has fewer shoes in their closet than I do in mine? And just say, like, man, I know how hard it's been to run the race for me. There have been times I've gotten discouraged and weary in my soul, and I say, well, how wearying must it be to be in a much more difficult thing? See, I think of, again, my lane. I'm just self-reporting, that my lane, I feel like I got an inside lane in life. Again, lots of love in my life, lots of loved ones in my life, lots of people who invested in my life, lots of people who gave me additional chances and all that kind of stuff. I understand that. I do. I get it more than ever. I get it now. And my lane has kind of been nicely, like if I think of it like a track, it's been that cushy kind of thing. And I had some nice shoes to run in, and, I had a reasonable, I had a lot of encouragers, a lot of people yelling, you can do it, And I know that's not a common experience. I can think about that and I can say, like, well, what should I do with that? Well, I guess what I do with that, I'm not going to feel guilty about it, but I am going to feel grateful for it. And I'm going to realize that I have now the capacity that maybe many others don't to be more compassionate for someone who is running without all those advantages. To maybe spend one or two of my laps of my life clearing hurdles for other people. To say, like, hey, maybe paving that path instead of throwing rocks in the road and all the rest would be a smart thing. I'm going to be on the side of this equation again, of realizing, hey, it hasn't been easy for anyone, but it's been easier for this one than many. And so let me think about that. Let me not get proud about that. Let me not get arrogant and think that I'm something so great if I got anything great done. But instead say, you know what's greater? Equality is greater than division. And I'm not going to seek to divide. I'm going to seek to unite. I'm going to seek for commonality. I'm going to look to build bridges in people's life and realize that if somebody's tripped up and enslaved and slowed down and wiped out, well, and why not? It's not easy. And so I think about this. What do? I look unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. See, this is what it encourages me to do. It says, you want to look at someone? Look at him. For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. He despised the shame. He sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. See, I think about it this way, and I don't know what your concept of Jesus is, but I think it's really important to look back and really look at the scriptures and see what he was about. He was a guy who endured the cross, okay? I mean, this talks a lot about enduring, but he had to endure a lot. What's funny about him is his picture is kind of like the one from Moses from last time, where it says, like, Moses was a guy who could have had the privilege of the palace, but instead he experienced the malice of being, one of the powerless people. He said, this is what I'll do. I could stay with this inhumane group of people who like to enslave, but instead he said, I'll even go join the side of the slaves and say, like, we're taking my people out of that. And it wasn't even just leaving them there. It was saying, I will use whatever abilities I may have picked up from Pharaoh, but I'm not going to use it to keep myself in power. I'm going to be a freedom fighter, so to speak, right? I mean, that's what Moses was. But that's what Jesus was too. He had a great spot in heaven already taken care of, right? I mean, I think that's important to know that he wasn't just a godly man. The Bible teaches of him as God as a man, that he actually left the throne room of heaven, came to earth as one of the powerless, maligned, misunderstood, mistreated people. He was, right, God as a man, as a human, But he was treated as inhumanely as anyone probably could be. And you see in here, it says, that's a guy, when he's writing a person's story, nobody can say, well, Jesus, you don't really understand. You do not understand what it's like to be me. Jesus understood. One of the things that he did, I love it. He was always crossing racial barriers. You know, his parables, most of them were just offensive to the people in power simply because the heroes in his story were the people who were used to being villains in people's stories, right? The Good Samaritan, just by its title, nobody believed that was even possible, right? Because Samaritans were the hated culture and race at the time, right? They were like, oh, they're worse than dogs. And you see in this that Jesus was always like doing things that even shocked his followers, right? His followers had to figure stuff out. Jesus had to get rid of them sometimes so that he could treat a person well, because even his followers didn't get it. They were like, do you want us to burn down the village? Because they didn't agree with you. And Jesus is like, oh my. You're on the wrong side of the equation. You're on the wrong side of the equation. You have more in common with the people who don't believe in me than the people who do believe in me, right? We all need mercy. We all need God's grace. And it says that for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. See, I'm a terrible runner. I'm slow. I give up easily, but I've run a few races in my life. Ones that real runners would say, like, that doesn't even count. You don't get a sticker for that, you know, but I have a couple shirts here and there and things that I've run in. But one of the things that people would always tell me is you have to keep your eyes on the horizon. That if you want to run and run well, you've got to run toward a thing. And as you're running toward that thing, you're not looking down at your feet and counting steps. You're not looking back over your shoulder and seeing how many people you've passed. You're not doing any of that. You're like fixed on the finish, man. I'm going to make it to that finish. Okay, that mountain up there, that's where I'm headed. And I'm headed on that horizon. My eyes are on the horizon. And the eyes on the horizon of this race is I fix my eyes on Jesus. If I look around at the world today, I go, are we ever going to get it? Are we getting any better? Are we only getting worse? We make 2 steps up and 3 steps back. We get rid of the people who are the most humane, are treated the most inhumanely. You know, some of the greatest people who've ever walked this planet have been, you know, had their lives ended early and violently and all kinds of stuff. And you go like, man, what a mess. You go, if I look too much at all of that, I'm not ignoring it. I'm not turning my eyes from it. But if I look at myself, I don't have all the answers. If I look at other people, they don't have all the answers. But my eyes are on the horizon. This is what it's saying. And I have to keep my eyes on what's ahead. I can't be running back, looking over my shoulder. And you know what? When I think about that, I press on. These are the things of Scripture. My eyes are on the horizon. There's still a little of my life left. Maybe I can get the last part even better than the first part. Not necessarily for creature comforts, you know, are the things that maybe people run in the race for and think that's what the human race is for, you know, the rat race. And you go like, no, I'm not competing against anyone. I'm competing against weariness. I'm competing against, discouragement. I'm competing against self-pity. I'm competing against my biases and blind sides and my self-interest and my selfishness, you know. But I love this because Jesus was shamed. He was put to public shame. And notice this. It says he despised the shame. It doesn't say he enjoyed the shame. It doesn't say he embraced it and said, oh, it's not that bad. I'm going to minimize it. Can I tell you that what he did is he despised it. What he did is he rejected the rejection. He pushed back on the pushback. He was a guy who didn't just accept the unacceptable. He said, this is unacceptable. But he still accepted the fact that in this world, there were going to be people who were more interested in the division than they were in the commonality. Instead of looking at Jesus and looking for what he did for common people, what they did is they said, well, you're just the common denominator and we're just going to get rid of you. We're just going to get rid of you. And he said, you know what? I'm going to push past that, but I'm going to push back on that too. And there's no shame in despising the shame. There's no glory in glorying in how messed up and inhumane society can be. There's no way that you can just look at that and say, well, it's just the way it's always been. It's the way it'll always be. No, he went to the cross, but he went to the cross partially to show the desperate need all of humanity has, because it was the people in power who used their power and protected their power jealously by getting rid of a person who tried to be there for those who had been overlooked. See, think about this. There was a joy set before him. Have you ever thought of what it was? It wasn't heaven. He was in heaven before he left, right? He wasn't like going, oh, I finally get to heaven by being a really good guy. It wasn't that. The joy was he wasn't going to be there alone. The joy was you. The joy was me. The joy was us. The joy was the crowd in the cloud, right? The joy was the fact that people who ran the race and made it past ridiculous hurdles and through crazy obstacles and unbelievable setbacks and terrible mistreatment and grave injustice and all the rest, who were sawn in two and all kinds of crazy stuff like that, said, it can be done. It can be done. It can be run. It can be won. See, they were a testimony to that. I love that. And they were now cheering on, figuratively speaking, the people who are running now. They're cheering me on. They're cheering me up. They're giving me hope. They're giving me courage as I look at their life, but not just looking back at the Old Testament, not just looking back at this, but looking around. Again, looking at people making very difficult choices in today's world. People, having a voice and a choice that costs them a lot. Maybe costs them a lot of physical pain. Maybe costs them a lot of economic pain. All kinds of things, and says, well, you know what? I'm going to stand on the side of equality because it's greater than on the side of division. And you know what? It's funny. Sometimes people talk about equality and cause division. But I'm here to come back and say, if that's you, it's not going to be me. That's your race. You figure that one out. But this is what I know. I'm going to look unto Jesus, the author and finisher of my faith, of our faith, who for the joy set before him, which was people who looked like me and people who don't look like me, people who live like I do, people who don't live like I do, people who speak my language, people who don't, people who I'll maybe think, wow, that person knew you? Yeah, Scott, that person knew me and grew like me more than you did. And you go, oh. See, for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of God. And that's where it's going to end for all of us. And that's why he says, hey, consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your soul. I think about this. I want to leave these thoughts with you today, and I hope they help. I really do. If there was hostility against the best of us, and I think Jesus certainly was the best of us, there would be hostility against the rest of us. If I'm hoping to go through this world without setbacks, without just trials and things that are just plain wrong. I mean, this is just wrong. That's so discouraging. That's so tiring. That's so wearying. That's so unfair. That's just so not even humane the way that treatment is, or this system has to be changed. Will anything ever change it? And you see and listen to arguments on both sides, and you're just like, oh, I'm just so confused. What should I do? Well, this is what I know. I'm going to look to the author and finisher of my faith. I'm going to be grateful for the lane that I've been able to run in. And I'm going to try to let that gratitude turn into even more of an attitude of saying, you know what? I'm going to be on the side of equality. If I can work for justice, I will. If I can walk for justice, I will. If I can talk for justice, I will. If I can take a stand for, the powerless, I will. If I have any ability to be a spokesperson or a cheerleader or a person who could encourage or somebody who could empower, I will do that. If simply listening to somebody is such a departure from what they're used to, I'll listen to somebody, and maybe they don't need to hear my opinion as much. But maybe they can look at my life and say, like, wow, that's greater. We got more in common. We don't look alike. We don't dress alike. You're from a different age and era and stage of life than I am. Visually speaking, we don't have anything in common. But you see my humanity. You see my humaneness. And you want to bring a humaneness to my race too. We're in this together. See, and I think about that. When somebody thinks that way, the race can be done. The race can be won. There's a race set before me. And again, my finish line is the one who I will give account to for the things that I did and I didn't do, the things I was and I was not. And when I think about that, I have very little time to complain about how someone else is running their race when God has put a race in front of me and said, time's a ticking, time's a ticking, time's a ticking. You'll be in the crowd in the cloud before you know it. Will you have a life that you ran your race well? You ran the humane race. God, I thank you for this. I thank you for the thoughts that you have put into my heart and life through these scriptures. And again, what's great about these is these are examples from all walks of life, from all stories, people who have so little in common in some ways, except the common thread of grace that ran through their race that let them say, it can be done. It can be done against all odds. It can be done against all opposition. It can be done when it was so wrong what went on there. There was so much hostility. And yet that person somehow kept the humanity and humility to keep their eyes on the horizon and say, I'm headed to the throne of God. And the fact is, I would rather face the throne of God as someone who had been mistreated than a person who had mistreated people. I would rather face the throne of God as a person who had been wronged and hurt than a person who went through life wronging and hurting. I'd rather go through life as somebody who tried to build things that people kept tearing down, finding fault with, than a fault finder who is tearing down the work of other people. And so God, I pray that you would help me to run my race. And if in doing that in any way, there's someone and someone's along the way that you have put us together in some way, that we would continue to say, I'm going to be on this side, the greater side of equation, even if it means people look at me as lesser in life. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.